It had hit us pretty quickly. We had just helped our friend Applejack overcome some troubles. She had tried to run away from us when she couldn't accept what she thought was a defeat, but we reassured her that she is a great mare that is always a winner in our books. It was the least we could do as her friends. But then our instincts struck us once again. I'm not sure how the others feel them, but for me, it's a surge of energy in my wings. The single unused portions of my body were fresh and ready for awesomeness. It didn't take too long for us to realize the cause of our distress. Not one, but two of our other friends were missing. It became clear that they were abandoning the chase. With this fact, the entire mood of our group had changed from calm and relaxed to tense and unsure. However, my friend Twilight immediately jerked her away to the direction she believed we had gone in and pointed her hoof. She sprinted, and we followed behind her. My legs were sore after the intense run, so I jerked my wings and soared no more than a couple feet above the others. My limp legs were dragged by the rushing air. Despite the ease I had with flying, my lower body was stinging. It was an inconvenience, but luckily it didn't interfere with my flight. Wind was non-existent, so it was easy for me to keep my eyes focused on the dry desert before me. But in the midst of my strife, I heard panting from below. I knew what it was, and I wanted to help. I wasn't sure how, but if there was anything I could have done, I would have been at peace. Although I yearned to look down, something halted me. A voice told me that if I darted my eyes for even a second, all concentration would have been lost, and a crash would have been inevitable. After an eternity of listening to their suffering, I was only awaited to a wretched sight. Before me was my friend Rarity, exhausted and filthy, struggling to drag along a pink mare, Pinkie Pie, along the arid sand. Twilight gasped as she rushed to Rarity and hoisted her weak body. I automatically flew to Pinkie and helped her up, taking the weight off Rarity. The usually clean unicorn was drenched in sweat mixed with sand, staining both her violet mane and white coat. She violently panted as Twilight assisted her in her walk. Pinkie was a similar story, only she wasn't as awake. Her breasts were much softer, and from what I could tell needed more effort to make. The little pink ball of energy was replaced by this rag doll, unmoving and unaware of her surroundings. I felt myself die seeing both of them look like this. My head throbbed and my chest exploded. I knew how they ended up like this. I was mostly galloping our wagon, but I was able to catch a glimpse of Pinkie lunging at Applejack's cart. I knew from that moment that it would happen. But the thought flashed in my mind before I blindly returned my focus towards running. Not too long after, I heard Pinkie's voice, but I didn't pay attention to what she said. I then heard a scream, most definitely Rarity's, and the young memory slapped me in the face. And I was hit again as Twilight was begging beside me. "Rainbow, go back," was what I heard. I didn't know what happened after that. Those 3 words flew into one ear and flowed out the other. But how could I have been sure? I was sprinting. My legs were aching, but I felt nothing. If I wanted to stop, would I have been able to? And only now was I thinking about these things that were now so far in the past. Answering back to my friend, my mouth opened without will or knowing and breathed out, "No time! They knew what they were getting into!" Mindless words! No thought or reason put into them. They moved with the air, weightless. And yet, look what they done. Stupid. And now in this moment, I couldn't wait for Pinkie to wake up so she could punch me, kick me, do whatever. I would even thank her for doing so. And if she said no, I would have done it myself. It's what I deserved for being a bad friend. With the speed we had, it wouldn't have been hurt to just go back for them and then catch up with Applejack. Therefore, my excuse is completely wrong. As I trudged along by her side, rightfully guilt flushed over me, but I refused to stop. Despite this, I found it harder to look at Pinkie's slow body, and I knew I just had to look away. I tried to do just that, but her desperate self locked onto my eyes. She looked like she needed my eye contact at all times. She probably didn't even know it was me holding her, but the sad shambles that made her up would fall apart the moment I turned my back. Although my vision was only set on her, I noticed buildings in the background, showing that we must have been back in Dodge Junction. It was then that I remembered walking through the small town just yesterday. I believe there was a doctor's office there. As we entered the town's main road, my thoughts were proven right as Twilight directed us into a small building. "Excuse me, doctor," Twilight said quickly, trying to spell out every word. "My friend needs our help." We carried Pinkie and Rarity over to the white mare with a matching coat. The only thing breaking the pattern was her red mane and eyes. I finally looked up and saw her rush over to us. Get him on the cots." We obeyed and lied down their sore bodies. At the same time, I collapsed into a nearby chair. The room was surprisingly fitting for a doctor's office, even though it was in such an empty town. 2 white beds, each being used by our friends, were lined up against the wooden wall, and on the side opposite of me was a series of cabinets and drawers. In addition, the other 2 walls had doors leading into the other rooms, one of them being the one where we came in, and the other going somewhere else. The doctor raced into the unknown room, and quickly returned with some water bottles and ice packs. She gave us some of them, especially the Twilight. "Place these on your friend's limbs." Twilight took no break in the order and carried it out in 5 seconds flat. Not that I counted, but it seemed pretty fast for an A-leg like her. Look at myself finding something funny in a situation like this. I made sure not to show the slightest sign of laughter or happiness. My face was rock solid as I sat numbly in the chair. All my other friends were standing, but I couldn't bring myself to my hoofs. I watched as the doctor examined Pinkie's body. Meanwhile, Twilight was feeding water to Rarity. The white unicorn was practically knocked out, leaving Twilight to pour it down herself. Her face was tight. I have seen her like this before, especially when she got worked up over small matters. Most of the time, I thought it was hilarious how she did that. It was one of the things I liked about her. But here, the mere sight of her radiated stress onto my skin, which sunk underneath. Her entire body was stiff, trying not to let a spasm throw her off her movements. Aside from her face, the rest of her was like a robot, moving carefully and without any form of passion. I felt another pang strike its blow into my head. "Can you explain to me what happened?" the doctor asked as she pressed Pinkie's limbs. The usually outspoken pink mare barely responded to what looked to be very painful. "They fell off a cart while we were leaving town," Twilight said as she rested by Rarity's side. I saw her face form a tint of red, but it was rather subtle. "It looks like one of your friends fell pretty hard," the doctor said as she pointed out Pinkie's left leg, and a terrible thought invaded. What if I had broken Pinkie's leg? What if she had to wear a cast for the next month or 2? And it would have been all my fault. I continued to watch, frozen, as the 2 mares talked. "I thank you for bringing your friends here," the doctor said. Her face was firm, but it also gave a sense of hope. It didn't last long, though, as it dropped. "But I'm afraid there's little I can do. My office doesn't have the equipment to accommodate your friends." Twilight looked up at the doctor and listened. "Based on my immediate observations, I can predict that one of your friends," she said, pointing her hoof to Pinkie, "has a broken leg." I knew it. It was my fault. And right now, I wanted to vanish. I needed to escape when my entire body was dead. "I can give her a splint for her leg. However, you're probably going to have to go to the hospital to get it checked out. If you want, I can have my assistant give you a ride to the closest one," the doctor said. Twilight quickly nodded her head. "Yes, take her there," she said with obvious restraint. The doctor galloped into the other room. Not long after, a white mare with a green mane appeared. The doctor popped back out with a plastic splint and rushed to secure it on Pinkie's damaged leg. She was able to complete the task in 10 seconds flat, with impressive precision. Afterward, the assistant grabbed our attention. "Come with me," she said, directing us into the other door. Twilight and the others grabbed Pinkie and Rarity as they made their way out of the room. It was especially hard, though, for me to get up. My legs refused to move. I saw Applejack, however, looking at me forlorn. She stood still for a moment before walking over to me. "You need help?" she said. I raised my head and lowered it down. Applejack grabbed my upper hooves and pulled. It didn't take much effort for the strong mare to hoist me up. "Now come on, Sugar Cube," she said, grasping me. As she loosened her grip, I tried as hard as I could to move through the door. On the other side was a smaller room. I didn't pay much attention to it, as I saw an opening on the other side of it, leading out of the building. I struggled to move through it. Out there, I saw a black cart. The assistant was in the driver's seat with 2 stallions in the front. Unlike the other carts I've seen in this desert town, this one was longer and had 2 doors on the opposite ends. I saw Twilight, Applejack, and Fluttershy helping Pinkie and Rarity into the back door. I moved to get a closer look. Inside was a separate compartment. There were 2 doors, 2 beds, and a chair. Enough for Pinkie, Rarity, and 1 guest. After getting the 2 in there, Twilight closed the door, leaving herself inside. Fluttershy and Applejack ran to the front door and jumped in. "Come on, Sugar Cube," Applejack said, projecting her voice. I took the order to fly with whatever result my wings had to get there. I then closed the door and the cart moved. The ride to the hospital was solemn and silent. I looked to my left and saw Applejack, whose face was as paralyzed as mine. I then realized it. She, too, must have been feeling some guilt from the incident. But how can anyone be more at fault than me? Thinking about Applejack made the others come to mind. Twilight must be stressed out over this, and Fluttershy was probably broken as well. I leaned over and saw the gentle Pegasus. She was looking out the window, not making a sound. They must have all been assuming guilt. But they did nothing wrong. I hate it when they're all down like this, especially from my doing. Eventually, I felt a stop. "We're here," the assistant shouted through the cart's walls. I again had difficulty moving, and Applejack had to help me. I felt so bad for having her do this. The 3 of us rushed over to Twilight and helped her get Pinkie and Rarity out of the compartment. However, we all crowded around her, fighting to assist our friends. I saw Twilight amidst a hectic scene, and her face grew redder with each word coming out of our mouths. She attempted to get their bodies while keeping themselves together. To me, their voices weren't too loud, and they weren't trying to kill her. Despite this, Twilight appeared more confused and impatient. "Quiet!" We were all halted by the sudden outburst. Twilight's eyes were squinted, her cheeks stretched, and her forehead burning crimson. "Only 1 of you per girl. Every pony else, step back!" Applejack remained by Rarity's side as she grabbed her white legs. My eyes went to Fluttershy, who was trembling and shakily gasping. I had no choice. I quickly got a hold of Pinkie's legs, trying not to cause further injury to them. I watched Twilight and Applejack slide Rarity out. It was a smooth motion that ended with Applejack supporting Rarity as she barely clung on. Moving to Pinkie, the 2 of us moved her out much slower. This needed to be meticulous, as her body was more delicate at this stage. However, the 2 of us managed to get her out, and we carried her all the way into the hospital, the others following us. This hospital was smaller than the one in Ponyville, but it was big enough to help us in any way we needed. Despite Twilight's warnings of being careful, I felt as if we were moving too fast. I wasn't sure if it was me moving slowly, her speeding up, or both. I just didn't know. Before I knew it, we made our way through the door and into the decently sized lobby. "We need your help!" Twilight was panicking. I could feel her shaking, vibrating through Pinkie's body and onto my hooves. I could also hear her breathing from this distance. It was heartbreaking to see her so distressed. The nearby nurses were blasted by this wretched wail and fetched for 2 stretchers. The whole scene occurred in 30 seconds flat, and we hurriedly followed our friends as they were carried to their rooms. The ordeal was a flash for me. I didn't process it. I didn't want to. And as I sat there longer and longer, I blocked myself more and more. I didn't even realize that we had moved from the doorway of the examination room to chairs right outside. I didn't cry. Or at least I didn't think I did. I couldn't tell. It was the only sound of the door opening that brought me back. I noticed I was one of the doctors, a brown stallion with slicked back white mane. "Don't worry, girls, your friends will be fine." I felt something in me, trying to climb back to a summit. It had plummeted considerably. However, it wasn't giving in. "But I'm afraid, Miss Pye, does have a fracture in her leg." Something crashed into it from above and was falling once again. "You're lucky that she got here when she did. If she had come in later, the damage would have been much more severe. We have placed a cast on her to help with the recovery. And as for Rarity, she was terribly dehydrated. The 2 of them will have to stay overnight. I will suggest for all of you to find a motel to stay at." "We'll stay here!" My eyes caught Twilight rocketing from her seat. "We will stay here as long as our friends are here." Despite her anger, the doctor stood tall, and his face was unchanged. "Under hospital policy, visitors may stay until 10 p.m. After that, you must leave until 7 a.m. the next morning. There's a motel across the street from here where you and your friends could stay." I expected another protest. However, Twilight didn't open her mouth beyond heavy breathing. She fell back to her seat. For the remaining time in the hospital, none of us spoke. We were alone, aside from our own thoughts. My own thoughts. No time. They knew what they were getting into. No, they weren't. Now that I could think clearly, everything came together. I blamed Pinkie for instigating such a wild chase at first, but now it was obvious that we would have done something anyway. And her jumping on Applejack's cart? Even with someone like me, I couldn't possibly have ran into that. My strength was more reserved for my wings, as I later found out. Besides, Fluttershy could have never done something so intense and painful. If she were in the hospital instead, I could never forgive myself. But then again, I couldn't forgive myself for what actually happened. Pinkie was only trying the most efficient and safest way of helping she knew. And now that I thought about it, her anger did play a role in that. With that in mind, she was being a good friend and hoped for the best. She fell off, causing her to scream something, but she didn't plan that. That was an accident. And Rarity? She was never much of a risk-taker, especially if it would ruin her looks. And she certainly never committed herself to something like this. She only wanted to help Applejack, just like the rest of us. Not by dashing on high pursuit, but by giving emotional support. And when Pinkie fell off the cart, not knowing what she was getting into, Rarity became a victim of chance. Pinkie was only helping in the way she knew how, and Rarity just happened to be her last chance at survival. Rarity didn't jump or do anything other than stand there as Pinkie slammed into her, causing her scream. They both fell off, as shown by their absence, and they didn't hope for it. They didn't know it could happen. Pinkie only knew of her mission, to talk to Applejack out of running. Rarity only minded her own business. She only knew of what she had to do. And when Pinkie was coming in her direction, she didn't have time to react before the force struck her. This was what most likely happened. I knew it. And even with all these circumstances in mind, I passed it off as their own doing. I wasn't thinking about anything else either. But shouldn't that be the right answer? Shouldn't the right answer be automatic? All 5 of my friends are important for very good reasons. And I, of all ponies, have the exclusive privilege of being all of their friends. Pinkie and Rarity are no exception to this. In fact, I am loyal to them. I have an allegiance that is unconditional and strong. Such beliefs have even named me as the wielder of the element of loyalty. But am I? Does my loyalty have limits? At what point do I push certain matters aside? The example I set today clearly showed that the mindset I thought was as natural as breathing isn't so. The only time I could ever stand by my friend's side was if their importance to me was in my focus. It wasn't enough to know what their problem was. Funny how I thought those two seamlessly came together. Nope. I needed to know both in order to show support. Sure, I helped Applejack, but I was able to turn back for Pinkie and Rarity too. Twilight knew it was possible. If that egghead said it, then it had to be true. But I set aside the fact that I was too selfish to fight the unchanging rhythm of my legs. That was my problem, not theirs. It was then that I casually assumed the worst of my friends. What kind of pony does that? And especially the element of loyalty. I'm nothing. I didn't have loyalty. It was a pathetic dream I thought I could make true. I finally learned the truth. But the ponies around me, I was just a cold stone. I was pretty sure someone could have just passed me off as bored. Some pony that didn't want to be there. I wouldn't have blamed them. It turned out that everything lasted longer than I thought. The doctor returned telling us visiting hours had ended. Once again, I was planted to the chair I sat in. No! I couldn't have forced Applejack to have to lift my worthless soul back up. Finding the strength to do it myself would have at least given me at least one reason to live. Doing so took all the energy I could master, but I was able to find it. I found myself standing on my fours. My body weighed a ton, and my legs trembled as I struggled to move across the white hallway. I saw Applejack before me, staring with caring eyes. "You okay?" she asked, looking on. I told myself no. I needed to be strong somehow, but my legs didn't move. I was on the verge of collapsing right there in the hospital. Despite this, I didn't feel my body sway to a side. It lingered at an even level, and it was then that I felt Applejack help me forward. "I've got you, Sugar Cube," she said. It was a nice breeze into my left ear as I was being supported in a moment of weakness, or should I say, a day. Applejack carried all the way out of the building into this two-story motel nearby. The four of us gathered in the cramped lobby to see a mare on the counter. Twilight approached with a slowed trudge and a low head. She looked up to see the receptionist's smiling face. "Room for 4, please," she whispered, just loud enough for the receptionist to hear. She displayed great concern in her bright blue eyes, similar to Pinkie's. "Are you— Just give me a room!" The bark burned at the mare's face as she briskly reached for a key with the room number written on it. She carefully handed it to Twilight. "Have a nice day," the mare told us, but Twilight was already nearing the door to go to the room. We followed behind her, me resting against Applejack's shoulder. Our room was on the first floor at the end of the hall. It was what I expected in a small hotel as this. A small space with a single large bed and a bathroom in the back. As worn as my body was, I knew that Twilight should have the bed to herself. And the others seemed to agree as they allowed her to fall into the bed. It was the least I could do at a time like this. Maybe I would learn to think about others. But even with Twilight laying there, something about her left a stinging urge in me. Something told me I needed to talk to her. Maybe calm her down. I tried to convince myself that all she needed was a night's rest, but this hole kept growing. I needed to talk speak with her, to fill this dark, terrible void. So here I was, standing above Twilight. Twilight, was all I could say to start. Leave me alone, I heard muffled by the mattress. It was clear that she didn't want to talk. I turned back, hoping to get away, but the need came back. It filled my head with desire, not just to help my friend, but to prove I still had loyalty. I couldn't leave her. I faced the broken unicorn on the bed before taking a seat beside her. Listen, Twilight, I hate seeing you like this, and I want to make you feel better. I raised one of the hooves and slowly moved it onto our back. I know how it feels. We're all thinking about Pinkie and Rarity, and I just want to let you know that you're one to talk. I stopped, thrown back by the personal attack. It hurt my pride a little bit. No, I had to go on. Twilight, if you let me in the girl's hell, then you're the reason we're suffering, she yelled, this time loud enough to shock the whole room. Twilight thrust her body and exposed her tense face and disheveled mane. I told you to go back. I told you they needed our help. But you were so stuck up that you just had to leave them. It was like she was smart enough to read every detail in my mind. Who am I kidding? She is smart enough to read other ponies' minds, but that wasn't what she was using. She was using obvious information known by every pony. Even Fluttershy couldn't ignore them. Not only were the facts undeniable, but they were crafted specifically to make even nice, quiet ponies like Fluttershy openly furious. So what was I gonna get from a more neutral, outspoken mare like Twilight? Her face being stuck in an uncomfortable tension, air being pushed out of her nostrils, and a mouth revealing her clamped teeth. But then, what would I have expected from someone like you? She jabbed her hoof into my chest. The sharpness of its force stabbed my body. The details of her face blurred, making it harder to see. Element of loyalty, she jeered sarcastically. As if you would say to me if I was falling off a ledge. You know, until the Wonder Bolts appeared out of nowhere and offered you a spot in their roster. I was aghast. I knew I deserved a beating, but that was uncalled for. All of my internal organs have been ripped out at once. A terrible emptiness enveloped my body, leaving me nothing left. I wanted to hit back. I needed something to say, something I knew would have hit her, something that would have hurt her. I quickly figured out, and I felt my mouth struggle open. I was absolutely certain that this would destroy her. I tried to breathe, and I prepared my mouth, but nothing came out. Not even air. There was nothing to say. And worse, I realized that that was what I deserved. I had it coming, and I had no reason to fight or deny it. As this earth-shattering fact struck me, I felt my hoof shake. The feeling spread through my entire body, eliminating what little control I had of it. My vision failed me once more. It was impossible to make out finer details, and even basic shapes were now difficult to see. There was something I wanted to say. No, scream. There seemed to be no other reasonable way to do so, but I couldn't even open my mouth anymore. Oh, how I wanted to scream. There was no way I could stay in here. There was plenty of places I wanted to escape today, but any other failed for the exact same reason. But this time, I felt something amazing. In my wings, I felt a tiny spark of energy. This was my chance. I was able to extend and burst a fit. I fell on the door, and there was enough in me to swing it open. I gusted out. My wings jolted until they gave out. I crashed into the sand. I wasn't sure where, but that didn't matter. Now, alone in this darkness, I tried to breathe, but air couldn't come in. Instead, the action came off as pathetic and shaky. I inhaled a little deeper, and I yelped. It was weak and lonely. I tried again, but the sob was choked out even quicker, and faster, and faster. Before I knew it, my curled up body was shaking as sobs overpowered my body. I cried for Pinkie. I cried for Rarity. But I also knew that Twilight and the others would never forgive me. And the others would never forgive me. No! They couldn't forgive me! Even if I spent the rest of my life as their slaves, they could never forget the crime I committed today. And neither would I. These truths conquered my mind. There was nothing else on the side. Anything else I thought would have gotten obliterated. There was no smaller details, for everything was already apparent. As I lied there, I felt a hoof touch my shoulder. It was very familiar. I looked up, and I could barely make out Applejack standing over me. I knew I would owe her big time after this. She used her body to help me up. Once again, the action proving to be easy. On the lift, she pulled me into a tight embrace. It's alright, Sugar Cube, she said immediately, but that was all that was needed. I felt more sobbed, trapped in my throat, and I was still unable to get decent breath before one of them took over. And that's all that happened for a while. Whether it was a while or just a couple of minutes, it was nice for Applejack to be right there. I would have been normally gagged at something like this, but I couldn't help it at this point. Eventually, I was able to make out a complete inhale. It was slow and faltering, but it was undisturbed. I tried again, made another one. I went for a third one. It was seized by a sad hiccup. Finally, I was able to speak. I'm fine, I whispered. Another hiccup escaped. It's okay. I didn't mean to snap you. She was just so worked up over this. Applejack answered. She rubbed my neck and back. She never broke the hook that I needed so bad. I found comfort through her warmth and her words. I knew I would later refuse to look back on it, but not for this moment. Despite this feeling brought on by Applejack's presence, a terrible pain pierced every part of my body. I was still haunted by this horrible reality. But she is right, I said. Applejack only hugged me tighter as another sob broke free. About what? She asked soothingly. It was now hard for me to talk, but the fire in my heart wouldn't be extinguished until I spoke. I'm not loyal at all, I shuddered as I took another shaky breath. It's easy for me to forget what's important. A hiccup expounded from my mouth, leaving me with nothing left. I felt the embrace grow stronger. No, it ain't true, Applejack whispered. You are loyal, and you care for us very much. She was only lying to me, and I thought she was the element of honesty. But, I said, my voice breaking, Pinkie and Rarity needed me. My eyes looked up from Applejack's shoulder. I was only able to make out the motel and the nearby hospital. I guess I didn't make it very far. I whimpered. "No, it's all right," she said. "The doctor said I'm gonna be okay. You're gonna be out, and I'm out again. Just you see." I noticed her voice had trailed off at the end. My fit had ended, and I was left with just Applejack, alone in the dark and desert. I was able to bring one of my hooves to my eyes. I brushed it along one of my cheeks and noticed how it was damp. And when I got to my eye, I saw how it was wet as well. I wiped one before moving to the other, clearing my vision. I was able to see better, but both eyes were sore. My mind then went back to Applejack. Her body was growing colder along with the hug. In addition, the silence she let was a dagger driving into my ear. "Applejack," I said stronger. "Are you alright?" I felt her move her head slightly. It rubbed up and down against my neck before resting. "Yeah," she answered. The only thing was it sounded fake. Applejack was never good at hiding things, and this wasn't any different. I had to respond. "Tell me what's wrong," I demanded. My voice was hoarse, but I tried to show assertiveness. There was more silence. "Curse it." Applejack moved her head some more while holding on to me. She whispered. I noticed more motion on my neck before she responded. It's nothing, really." No, I would not take that. If I was going to be loyal, then I needed to help my friend. "Tell me now," I commanded. I lacked the volume and power I knew I could have, but that was the most I could come out. She said weakly. "It's not your fault." She was quiet. Her trail slowed that she had more to say. I would have to wait here and never leave until she was ready to finish. That was my mission. Because she lingered off again. I stood there and waited. It was my fault. A burst of energy found my hooves, and I used them to wrap around my friend. It was my turn to be supportive. If I didn't let my pride get to me, then I wouldn't have run away like that, and they wouldn't have gotten hurt. But I had nothing to say. How was I supposed to answer that? Now that I thought about it, though, I saw where she was coming from, and I knew how it must have been eating at her. Kind of like how it was killing me. And then Twilight, and Fluttershy too. Everything going on for all of us was chaos, so I did the only thing I could do. The least I could do to be loyal. Be there. I let her remain in my care as we stood there in the silent night. Nothing could have broken us in that instant. No words could have been said. Time had vanished as we were there. It wasn't a factor. The stiffness of Applejack's breast were the only sound. Tenderness was the only feeling. And the two of us were the only form of matter. The quietness was eventually broken by Applejack. "Thank you, Rainbow Dash." It was weak and short, but it was more than enough for me. I hugged her tighter. Now what would I say to that? I knew I needed to speak at some point, but what? I was never good at this sort of thing. It all seemed so mushy to me, and I never bothered to enter this type of situation. So I said what I thought was best. No problem. That's all there was. We remained in the long embrace for a little bit longer. It was worrying to know that I was able to help my friend. It turns out I do have loyalty after all. There is reason why I am the element of loyalty. I serve my friends well. Applejack was the first to separate us. For the first time in a while, I was able to see her face. It looked calm, and it was the same caring one I had grown attached to. She smiled. "Let's go talk to Twilight," she said. Yes, I had proven my loyalty, but there was still a lot of ties to mend, wrongs to right, and work to be done. But as we were walking, another flare worked its way through my body. My breast immediately became stiff and my heart sped up as I walked with Applejack towards the motel room. The two of us supported each other, with me grasping her. But I guess I must have tightened my grip too much as she stopped and locked her green eyes with my own. "Rainbow, you'll be fine," Applejack said plainly. I had no idea if I would have been able to go through with this. Did I have what it takes to patch things, or would I have only served to make things worse? Regardless, though, we moved on. Since the door was nearby, I didn't have time to think everything through. What I would say, where I would sit, or how I would keep myself going. Applejack placed her hoof on the wooden door and gave it a gentle, controlled knock. It opened quickly to reveal Fluttershy, whose lack of grace was apparent. Applejack and I slowly moved through the entrance. We saw Twilight lying limply in the bed. Although her face appeared calm for a moment, she tightened some of its muscles as her eyes saw me. She mustered the strength to sit up from the bed. That alone was all it took for me to shrink behind Applejack, forcing out a desperate exhale. "Now, Twilight," I heard Applejack said. "I know how you feel right now." She placed one of her hooves behind me and grabbed one of my own. In a single action, she brought me up to a normal position. After that, Applejack walked towards Twilight before sitting down beside her, similar to what I did earlier. I followed her and stood on the bedside. Twilight did not change her expression. "We're all feeling something, but it's alright feeling it. But there's one thing that's true." Applejack dreaded her eyes on Twilight as she spoke. "It ain't nobody's fault. It was all an accident." Applejack then turned to me and nodded her head. I knew it was a cue, but I wasn't able to move. I had really thought about what to say, but nothing seemed to work for me. I had to act quickly in order to get something, therefore I opened my mouth. "Twilight, there's nothing that can change that accident, but no matter what, we'll be there for you." I kneeled down and pointed my hoof at myself. "I'll be there?" I then extended the same hoof to Applejack. "Applejack will be there?" With that, in the corner of my eye, I was able to see Fluttershy sitting in a chair in the far corner of the room. She looked so afraid and fragile, as if one blow would have caused her to fall apart. I moved my hoof over to her. She noticed me and looked on. "Fluttershy will be there?" And then I turned my eyes back to a dissatisfied Twilight. "And I know Pinkie and Rarity would be there too if they could help. If they could. So, all you have to do is let us help you. We care for you, Twilight." I used my other hoof and grabbed hold of Twilight's. It felt firm, but I was surprised that Twilight didn't attempt to jerk it away. However, she stared at me with angry eyes. "And we will never leave you. Ever." Twilight was silent for a moment. However, I noticed her face loosen slightly. It wasn't much, but I would take it. Finally, she opened her mouth to talk. "I'm still upset with you, but I'll cooperate." I felt relaxed, but I knew there was still work to do. I remained in my stance as I felt the proper things to say come into my mind. "From what I can tell, you're upset with me because it's my fault?" I asked. Twilight huffed air through her muzzle. She bit her lower lip and she thought for a moment. She continued to press air through the small space she sat there. Well, if you hadn't abandoned our friends, then their injuries wouldn't have been severe, she said. It was obvious that she was struggling to control herself. I breathed carefully, calming the small bits of stress from my body. Twilight, I didn't know what I was thinking in that moment. My mind was just so focused on Applejack that I didn't want to break my concentration. I read my hoof, which Twilight surprisingly allowed me to do, but her face was a nasty detractor. Really, she said, barely above a whisper. My thoughts were on nothing but Applejack either. But when I saw Pinkie and Rarity fall off that cart, I didn't forget about them. She then raised her voice to a normal yet aggressive level. What are you trying to tell me? That you're a better friend to Applejack than me? My eyes raced to Applejack, begging for a solution, but she was unable to give me anything. I was stuck. I needed to think, but I was denied as Twilight continued. Or maybe it was just speed. Slowing down is something you never heard of. At least Fluttershy had the courtesy to stop for a bunny. I couldn't help but turn my head to the mentioned mare, whose fragile frame was shaking in the chair. I felt so bad for her. There's a lot of stuff in you, Rainbow. And no matter what it is that made you think it was a good idea to leave our friends for dead, I hope that you're happy that you got your wish. But she still wasn't done. In a quick jolt, she jerked her hoof out of my grip and brought it along with the others to her chest as she rocketed herself into her sitting position. But let's say none of that is important, she whispered. She leaned into me. I expanded my vision so I could see Applejack, who had a blank face and eyes devoid of life. I suffer. Pinkie and Rarity are in the purest of agony. Poor Fluttershy's in tears. She fell forward so hard that she crashed into my muzzle. All I could see was a pair of violet eyes scrunched between a concrete skin. But nobody cares. That's not important. You get to say that you're just as fast on legs and on wings. You're not just the greatest Pegasus in Equestria, but you're the greatest Earth Pony too. You're just so great and important. I then felt an invisible jab in my chest. I recognized it, but I didn't hurt any less. You're higher than Princess Celestia. Why, you're just a commoner when she bows down to you and your greatness. Twilight backed up, and I felt the moisture of her hot forehead getting stuck into my own. But her face was beyond boiling at this point as her teeth smashed against each other, forming an impenetrable wall of white. The great and important Rainbow Dash, she screamed, making each word clearly yet full of power. I'm sorry for being so close to you. Please forgive me, Your Highness. Twilight stopped the deafening puffs from her muzzle. She gasped, opening her mouth wider than I have ever seen it before. But that sight quickly dimmed as my vision grew weaker. Twilight, I heard Applejack say calmly. Through the embedded tears, I could see her wrapping her hoof around Twilight. You don't need to throw a fit. You know that ain't true. And must I get to you? I wiped my eyes, making them heavier than they already were. I was now able to see Twilight glaring at a stoic Applejack. You think you're a saint? You think you can speak to me like I'm in the wrong? Twilight paused for a moment and tightened her eyes to the point where they were almost invisible. Well, you're just as much to blame for this. You're just as stubborn as Rainbow Dash, maybe even more. To my right, I heard some stifled breathing. They were timid and hard to hear amongst the chaos. Now, Twilight, let's take it. You ran away like a coward when you lost some rodeo. You pushed us. You forced us to chase you. And look after what you caused. Applejack attempted to place her other hoof on the Twilight, but she smacked it both off at the same time. I'm surrounded by selfish, arrogant ponies. This was entirely preventable. Twilight's loud voice trailed off, though, as she said that. Pinkie and Rarity were betrayed and lied to. Twilight's face was drained of anger within seconds. The lack of that volume allowed for the whimpering to be heard. Only now did I turn to see Fluttershy with her head collapsed, her body trembling. Instinctively I flew over to her and hugged what I could. "Look at myself," I heard from behind. It was Twilight. "I don't even know what I'm saying." There was silence in the background as I focused on Fluttershy, who was barely able to breathe. I lifted her from the chair so she could be entirely wrapped. Her shaking from form haunted me. "Please forgive me, Applejack," Twilight begged. "Of course I forgive you. You just need to blow off some steam." I then grew a response in my head, as if it were magic. "You don't even need to ask me, Twilight. You know I'll be there for you," I said calmly as I held Fluttershy. I heard another sniffle from the mare before I felt her head rise and rest on my shoulder. "I'm fine now," with a hiss. It was barely above a whisper, and was immediately met with a hiccup. As a result, I held her tighter as I faced the wall's corner. "Twilight," I said, never leaving Fluttershy. "Is everything all right?" I heard a loud exhale from behind me. "Being angry didn't help at all," Twilight answered. "I might as well talk about it." An entire breath came out of her before she spoke. "It's just that I'm so nervous about Pinkie and Rarity," she said slowly. "When they first fell off, I wanted to go save them. I wanted to help all of my friends." She paused. "And then when I saw them, I felt the responsibility to help them. I would have done regardless. However, seeing them so weak, this made me nervous, stressed." The silence took over once again. I felt a light push against me. I noticed it was Fluttershy causing it. "Go over to her. She needs you more than I do," she said. I wanted to argue against it. However, when I saw her, which, despite being stricken with grief, demanded that I obey, reluctantly, I loosened my grip and rested Fluttershy in the chair. I took one last look at her, making sure she was alright, before turning around. Applejack was sitting on one side of Twilight, so I lowered myself into the other. From this angle, I was also able to see Fluttershy. Staring at Twilight, I placed my hooves under hers. Noticing the action, she faced me with her pained eyes. "We're all worried, Twilight," I said confidently, "and I don't blame you for getting worked up like this. You were just trying to get help and be there for our friends." I saw Applejack graze one of her hooves and rub Twilight's rugged neck. "They're safe now, and they're getting the rest they need to get better. And tomorrow we'll see them awake. We can talk to them and put this whole thing behind us." Twilight moved her head to the window and gazed out of it for a moment. I didn't speak, and neither did Applejack. In fact, I ended up looking out into the blackness. To my surprise, it was coming. It seemed like there wasn't a window at all, and I let my own concerns blow out into the wind. It's been a long day. I turned to see Twilight, whose body relaxed. "Yeah," I responded. "Maybe we should get to bed," Twilight said. She faced me, and I saw a smile that was formed on her face. Pinkie Pie would have been proud. I nodded before getting out of bed and lying on the carpet. "You don't need to sleep on the floor," Twilight said. "No, I insist. Things have been rough for you, and I wanted to have the bed," I answered while facing the wall from the ground. "You can sleep in the chair if you want." My eyes moved to see Fluttershy. She was standing halfway between me and the chair. The whole thing made me shake my head. "I'm fine, Fluttershy. You were there first, so you should have it." The timid pony was still for a moment. She took one last glance at me before she returned to her chair. She nuzzled herself into the semi-comfortable bed and turned off the light lamp that was beside her. I sat up against the nightstand and saw another lamp that was still on. I extended one of my hooves toward, but it was beat out by a purple one. I got a quick look at Twilight's hoof, switching the knob, and then it was darkness. "Good night, Twilight," I whispered as I leaned against the nightstand. "You too, Rainbow." With those words, I slid down the wall of the nightstand and laid my head flat on the floor. I closed my eyes and extinguished the faint light that was still in the room. I reopened them to find rays beaming through the window. Every part of my body felt rested, and I was easily able to lift myself up. I looked out to see a canvas of red, orange, and blue painted on the lower rim of the horizon, and slightly to the left was a bright ball that hung low in the sky. It turned out that Twilight was right. It had been a long day. I turned to my left to see Fluttershy, who was still sleeping on the chair. She was curled up in the small space she was given. I was also able to hear her soft breaths, which made up the calming atmosphere of the room. Even I had to admit it was adorable. As I continued to move through the room, I found Applejack lying on the floor. Unlike Fluttershy, her legs were spread out across the carpet. Her head was tilted sideways so that she could breathe. I noticed that her hat had fallen off on her head and was plopped down beside her. Finally, Twilight appeared similar to Applejack. Her body gave out where she was her slide down, under a white blanket on one end of the bed. I was barely able to hear a sound from her, as her breathing took up too much energy. Despite that, she looked peaceful. After an entire day of stress and exertion, she was finally allowed to rest. I returned to the window and sat down on the floor. I didn't feel tired, so I decided to watch the sunrise as I waited for the others to wake up. It was a nice morning. Fantastic. Awesome and beautiful. I couldn't believe that I was never awake to see something as amazing as a sonic rainbow. And the best part was that there was no buildings or mountains to block my view. I was free to see it all. But then they came back. I saw Pinkie and Rarity in the desert, nearly dead in the sand. They were alone, as if they were forced to drag their heavy bodies for miles to an oasis that didn't exist. Any confidence I had built up the previous night was sucked into the dry, empty void just outside the window. Despite what Applejack told me, I felt fear crawl through me. Doubt lingered as there was a chance that I wouldn't be forgiven. I imagined myself walking into the hospital room to be greeted by two faces even angrier than Twilight's. "You did this! I will never forgive you for this!" I gasped as those voices rang in my head. I nearly choked on my own breath as I struggled to calm down. Luckily, I wasn't enough to wake the others. As I taking one last relief breath, I tried to relax the rest of my body as I sat on the ground. It wasn't my fault, it was just an accident. I tried telling myself this, but that horrible feeling just wouldn't go away. I felt bad for doubting my own friend, but I just couldn't help myself. Eventually, I heard a gentle yawn. I looked over to see Fluttershy as she lifted her eyes open. I saw her get up from the chair and walk over to me. "Good morning, Rainbow Dash," she whispered. She then noticed Twilight resting on the bed. "Oh, I didn't wake her up, did I?" she asked even softer. It was almost funny watching Fluttershy act as if she had done something wrong. It's part of her sweet nature. "No, you didn't," I answered, while shaking my head. Fluttershy blinked before taking a long look at me. She was motionless, as her eyes were focused on myself and the floor. "You can sit in the chair if you want. I don't need it." "No, Fluttershy. It's your chair, and you should have it. I'm fine wherever I am." Fluttershy lowered her head, which caused some of her mane to drop. "I insist. You've been there all night. It must hurt your back," she whispered. "I'm not feeling any pain. And even if I was, you shouldn't have to take my place." Fluttershy was still for yet another moment. She stared at me with her blue eyes, begging for me to go to that chair, but all I did was respond with a look of my own, telling her to go back. After a couple of seconds, she turned around and slowly walked to the chair and took a seat. I smiled as I saw her enjoy its comfort. Some time afterward, Twilight and Applejack woke up. Both of them were calm and happy to wish me a good morning. By then, the entire sky was blue and the room was lit by the sun, but we were completely aware that what we had to do. Twilight was the first to open the door, and Fluttershy held it open to let her through. Applejack followed behind Twilight, and then was me. I grabbed the door with one of my hooves, and used the other to point towards the outside. Fluttershy was confused by the gesture. "You can go," I said. Fluttershy was quick to accept my offer, and she walked out the door. Once she was completely through, I exited. I had forgotten that the hospital was a short walk from the motel. I felt pain in my throat. To me, it was like a blockage that I couldn't penetrate. Of course, there wasn't actually anything there, but it felt real. The whole ordeal slowed everything down. Each second was an hour, and each step took more energy than a sprint across Equestria. An Ursa Minor must have been riding on me. In addition to all these factors, each grain of sand I stepped on felt like a shard of glass. My skin felt burnt as each beam of Celestia's sun blasted it. My mouth was clamped shut and prevented me from screaming. Before I knew it, I was inside the cool hospital. But even without the heat or rough ground, everything became more painful. My heart's pounding nearly knocked me over. I felt myself on the verge of hyperventilating, but I forced my breaths out as slow as I could. I also had to control each blink to eliminate any chance of crying. And here we were at the door leading into the room. How the hey did we get there so fast? I saw the doctor swiftly opening the door with his hoof. Twilight went in there first, then Applejack, and Fluttershy. My legs were locked as I stood within inches of the door. It was impossible for me to go any further. Applejack returned, and she grabbed my hoof. "Come on, Sugar Cube," she said calmly. "Pinkie and Rarity want to see ya." She was lying again. Why would they want to see me? And especially after what I'd done. I pulled my hoof in an attempt to slip from Applejack's grip, but it was useless. Applejack walked and my body moved with it. There was no difficulty on her part, as she dragged me like I was nothing. I panicked, and as I went through the doorway where the others were. And there they were. Within the first instant of seeing them, I was dead. My mind completely escaped from the outside world. I squeezed my eyes shut, and my ears turned off. I was floating in a black, soundless space. Despite the lack of any friends or company, I felt warm. I never needed to leave this paradise. If I stayed there, nothing else would have mattered. Rainbow Dash. No, I couldn't let the others outside get in the way. Rainbow Dash. I knew I had to stay here. If I woke up, then everything would have fallen apart. But it was no use as the world shook violently as my name was blasted through this vacuum. I tried to silence it, but it was overpowering, and my eyes were forced open. I was on the end of one of the beds. This one had a long sling coming down from the ceiling. A cat slipped its way through it. My eyes moved along the bed to see Pinkie Pie. The face I saw was smiling. I thought it was a dream or a trick. There was no way this could have been happening. "Are you alright?" Applejack asked as she placed a hoof on my shoulder. I was speechless, paralyzed, and confused. Nothing seemed to make sense. I looked to my right to see Rarity, who was also awake. Her white face lacked any stress as she stared at me. Now was the time where I would have woken up. I wasn't here. I was lying on the floor of the motel room, and if I was, lucky on my own bed, in my own house. Or maybe it was just a daydream. A very realistic daydream that I couldn't escape. I coughed out a chuckle. Okay, you don't need to be so nice. Every pony directed their attention to me and raised their eyebrows. Why wouldn't we be nice? Rarity asked. I took a deep inhale before jerking the air out to force out another laugh. I don't deserve it, I said before extending my hoof at Rarity. I'm the reason that you're here. My hoof then swung to the other bed. And you have a broken leg. I backed up so that I could have been seeing both of the hospitalized mares. Probably just keeping your cool before the others are here. But you don't need to hide. Laugh at your worst. I was waiting for something to happen. It was only a matter of time before that first strike would have come. I would have waited as long as it took. They had the right to take their name and their time. But it never came. Instead, Applejack came up to me and approached my ear. I thought you accepted the fact that it wasn't your fault, she whispered. My hand dropped to face the crystal clear floor. I thought I had too, I said. A shaky breath had to pass by before I could continue. But I guess I was wrong. I lifted up my vision, which was now becoming hazy once again. I was barely able to see Pinkie smile. Why was she doing that? I brought a leg up and it trembled in the air. I let it drop in front. The mere power of it forced my whole body forward. I stumbled with the other leg in a desperate attempt to not fall. I was assisted by an orange hoof which served as a safety bar. As I felt the load become lighter as something was nudging me onward, I saw myself getting closer to a pink blur. My chest burned as I looked at her. I was now able to raise my hoof onto the bed. It spasmed as I hung on the air, but it wasn't there long as it was squeezed and my body was pulled inward. Oh, Dashy, I'm so glad you're here. That voice was so warm, as if everything was perfectly normal. I didn't see a Pinkie Pie with a broken leg confined to a hospital bed. This Pinkie Pie is the one that bounces around Ponyville, picking delicious treats at Chicory Corner, and it's always spreading cheer with her infectious laughter. More tears filled my eyes until it became too much. My legs finally gave in and I collapsed beside the bed. I cried harder than I thought I ever have. What's wrong? I heard Pinkie ask. I raised my head and I wasn't able to see her. I knew it was Pinkie, but my eyes only allowed me to see a pink blotch. I'm sorry, I said, even though most of it was lost in overpowering wails. My chest pounded back and forth as I softened the Pinkie's hoof. I'm sorry, Pinkie, he asked. For what? I wanted to speak so badly, but I was being choked by a talon of grief and regret for leaving. What I was able to make up before a wet sniffle stifled my speech. You Rarity behind. I clenched my eyelids to prevent any more tears from streaming down my face. I felt them bursting out like a raging river. I clenched my teeth to muffle the sobs, but I did nothing to stop the rapid repetition. Don't cry, Dashy, Pinkie said as her hoof patted my back. Despite the comfort I got from the tender end, sadness still persisted in my body. My breathing was becoming short and dry as my throat was closing in. The tears never slowed down as they broke free from my closed eyes. I felt my body being drawn inward. I opened my eyes to see Pinkie pulling me into a hug. Shh, she whispered. Your friend Pinkie Pie is gonna make you smile. She swayed within her bed, and my own body moved with a gentle motion. It helped, but I still didn't feel happy. We can have a party right here in this room. Even if I can't get out of this sealed bed, we can play jokes, and I can tell funny jokes that will give every pony a kick. But I tried to say it before a sob escaped. Do you forgive me? Of course I do, silly filly, Pinkie said as he tightened the hug. The only thing I was left with was a shaky gasp. I found myself unable to move my breath in either direction. I was frozen. Ow! I got you hurt! The reply came in the form of a cute laugh. You didn't hurt me, Dashy. The fall did. What? Now wasn't the time for Pinkie's jokes. How was it that she couldn't take this grave matter seriously? But I didn't go. Something had built up my mouth that threatened to interrupt me. No. I had to continue. I swallowed in an attempt to keep the cursed sob down. Back for you. I betrayed you and Rarity, I said as the block regurgitated itself in the form of a hiccup. I was waiting for Pinkie to come to her senses and push me back with all her strength. I knew it wasn't like the Pinkie I knew, but every pony had a limit. But this hug never weakened, and the soothing sways continued. Yes, you did. If you hadn't, then we would have still been in the desert, Pinkie said in her cheerful voice. I noticed that the tears had stopped, but there was still a pain. My body was limp within Pinkie's embrace. Rainbow Dash, I heard a voice from behind me that was followed by a sigh. I immediately recognized it as Rarity. I will admit that I was offended when I believed that you and the others were abandoning us. I knew it! I was at fault for this! But then I heard another breath from her. But after some thought and a talk with the doctor, I came to a realization. Being with Pinkie Pie would have still had a broken leg, regardless of when you girls came back from us. I wanted to turn to Rarity and show that I cared for what she had to say, but I couldn't break from Pinkie. I lacked the energy to lift my own body, and I had to admit Pinkie's presence was quite comforting. What do you mean? Well, Pinkie broke her leg because of the fall, and only for the fall. If you came back sooner than you did, then that still would have been the case. As those words processed in my mind, the reality hit me. It made sense. But what matters even more, though, Rarity said, is that you eventually came back. Even with your eyes set on Applejack, you didn't forget about Pinkie and I. The guilt in I was melting away with everything that came out of Rarity's mouth. I couldn't believe I hadn't considered these factors earlier. But there was still something that irked in me, something that couldn't have been put to rest until it was confronted. Rarity, I said. I tried to project my voice so that it could have been heard. You said that you were offended when we originally didn't go back. There's a brief silence. Yes, but now I see why you went on for Applejack. I took a moment to inhale and exhale. I couldn't start crying again. Applejack, I said. Yes, Sugar Cube? Applejack answered. Remember when you and I raced in the running in the leaves? Yes. I needed another second to breathe. I felt Pinkie pull me in even more. Given how fast I ran on my legs, then, would I have been able to go back with Pinkie and Rarity and catch up with you? I asked. Not a single word moved in the air for a while. I wrapped my hooves around Pinkie. After all she's been through, she had every right to it. But even with that, There was an uneasiness in his silence. I honestly don't know, Rainbow Dash, Applejack said plainly. But you shouldn't beat yourself up over it. I tightened my grip with Pinkie and I squeezed my eyes once again. Even with the firmness of my hooves, the rest of my body trembled. Rainbow Dash, we all make mistakes sometimes, Rarity said. But we will still be there for you, because we're your friends. Yeah, Dashy. Friends always help one another. What? Am I a bad, disloyal friend? Of course not, Rarity said. I felt someone touch my shoulder. I turned to see Applejack again with a smile on her face. You were determined to help me when I needed it, she said. Pinkie pulled her hooves away from my body, which allowed me to see her. You came back for me and Rarity because you care about us, Pinkie said. You are a great friend, Rainbow Dash, and I forgive you, Rarity said. I turned towards Rarity and I saw her bright eyes and a pristine face. It was remarkable, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I flapped my wings and flew over to her with my hooves extended. I nearly crashed into her as I gave her a tight embrace of my own. By then, I felt a smile had formed on myself. Thank you, I cheered. You're quite welcome, Rarity responded. I turned my head back, and I saw the others looking at me in pure happiness. It was contagious, and it washed away any burden I had felt. I was free and relaxed as I smiled back on my friends. And I knew at that moment that I could consider myself a good friend, as I could now call myself loyal.